Okay, so I hid the slides, and now we're back talking about budgeting for marketing communications. We just left off with competitive parity, and now we'll talk about objective and task. Now, this is actually the most correct approach to use. It just says, you know, what objectives do we have? For example, what level of sales do we want to reach? What communication tasks do we need to do? What are our objectives for the marketing program? How can we support that with the marketing communications? And what specific tasks do we need to do to reach those objectives? So, do we need to do a nationwide campaign, advertising campaign? Do we need to do some event marketing, some search engine optimization, some search engine marketing? Do we need, to do some video blogs? Whatever the tasks are, do we need to make a brochure? Do we need to make a, catalog? Whatever the tasks are that are going to help us, achieve our objectives, that's what we have to do, and then we make budget that we know how much those things cost. What does a nationwide campaign cost? What does the search engine optimization agency charge? What does how much does it cost to do an AdWords campaign? Whatever it is, event marketing, then we just total up that budget, and that's what we get for the year. Now, the problem is, of course, that this requires a lot of, sophistication, a lot of knowledgeable personnel, people that know what they're doing in terms of marketing and marketing communications, know what the costs involved are, be able to, get the costs from the various agencies, have the time to calculate all of that and put it into a budget. But then there's also the problem of, well, do you really, that's what we want to do, that's what we say we need to do, but do we have that much money? Is it available to us? So, there's a reality check, right? Can we really afford to do all those things we want to do? So, in the end, well, first, before I say in the end, you know, we'll talk about this payout planning method. This is one more approach. This this really, the reason I'm showing you this is just to kind of get you to understand that at sometimes, especially in the beginning of a business or when launching a new product, that you have to be ready to make some losses. That it's not just really about what you can afford for that year, but treating advertising as an investment and understanding that sometimes investments don't pay back immediately, but they have to go for a longer term, and before you start seeing, before a break even or, seeing profit. So this payout planning approach, we can just say like, let's look at, year one, year two, and year three of a product launch. Let's just assume it's like either a new business or a new product. So in the beginning, the first year, you're spending, let's say that these are like $15 million, budget, and you make, it shows here like 50 cents per case, but let's just say that it's 50%, we'll just say that it's 50% of whatever the revenue is 50%. So, we sell $15 million in sales. We get 50% of that as profit. But because we spent $15 million in advertising, right? Then although we made 7.5 million profit, we're actually coming out negative. In year two, and what this also recognizes is that typically your first year you have to spend a lot on advertising in order to establish basic minimum levels of awareness that, in the in the first year of a business or a new product launch, that's the time when you really do need to, overspend or spend a lot. So the second year, you're actually cutting down a little bit from your budget. You're only spending 10.5 million. And then in the third year, you're reducing the budget even more, spending 8.5 million. So in the first year, you lost. You have a cumulative loss. A 1 year loss of 7.5, but your cumulative loss is 7.5 million. In the next year, because your sales were much greater and you spent less on advertising, you actually got profit contribution of 17.75 million, and you spent 10.5 million. So your yearly profit was 7.25 million. Your cumulative profit, but again, it's going to be a loss, is just 0.25 million. Then in the third year, your sales are much greater and you've spent less on advertising, so you're able to make, a great amount of profit. And then the cumulative, the 21.88 million for that yearly profit, and then the cumulative profit of 21.63. So again, the basic thing to understand here is that, in the launch of a business or launch of a new product, you typically need to spend a lot and be ready to, have loss, like maybe not make profit the first or second year, as it's shown here. That sales typically ramp up. They start off slowly, but they ramp up, hopefully, and they get greater and greater, and you can pull back the advertising budget a little bit and then make profit over the multiple years. So the actual thing that I want to say finally about budgeting for MC is that, realistically speaking, it's usually some combination of all of these. You might say, well, this is what we need to do, and use objective and task and say this is how much it's going to cost. But then your general manager or the owner of the company says, look, we don't have that much, we just have this much. And then you try to, allocate it as best you can. Or maybe you say, well, what's the competitors doing? We need to, match the competitors. Or, what's our plans for launching a new product? Well, we need to do that, and therefore we need to kind of understand that we're going to lose a little bit of money in the first year on advertising and take a loss on advertising. So yeah, it's usually some combination, some negotiations between you and your manager or the boss. Well, we talked about how to set the budget, right? But now we need to think about how to allocate the money that we have across various, communication tools. First, we also need to think in terms of the market size and the potential and any perhaps seasonality that exists in sales. So, if we have, for example, many different regions that we're allocating the budget across, then we have to think, well, put the most money. This sounds obvious, but it's necessary to say that, put the most money where you get the greatest return on investment. And so if you have certain regions with high sales, then you need to allocate, or high potential for sales even, then you need to allocate a higher budget for those regions. Or when there are certain seasons, if there's seasonality, if the high season, that's when you allocate the most budget, because you're going to get the greatest return on investment. Because if it's very seasonal, and let's say 80% of your sales come in the summer, then you need to put most of your budget during the summer, because every shift in people's preferences, or any likelihood that they're going to buy, any shift in that likelihood of buying toward your brand, it's going to pay off by the most consumption during that season, the greatest sales. So you'll make the biggest impact with the budget. Of course, if the competitors are spending in certain regions and you need to kind of match them and, have that share of voice, think about what the competitors are doing, and, you often have to allocate regionally to match the competition. We also need to think about cost and return on investment, how much the marketing communication tools cost, how well targeted they are. Uh, you know, Sometimes you end up getting what you pay for. Sometimes, that lower cost has lower targeting potential and you end up just wasting a bit more money. Sometimes it's worth to target in a higher, get higher targeting and, spend a bit more. But again, it depends, a lot on the return on investment. How much margin you're earning off each sale. For example, if you're doing like an AdWords campaign, you can calculate, how much you're willing to bid on a particular keyword, if you search for search engine marketing, because you know that you have a certain level of margin. So for each sale you earn this much money, then you're willing to allocate, money that should cover that, that will cover that cost. The margin should, each sale you can do the math basically with, you know, click-through rates and conversion rates. There's also creative considerations, basically things like, well, what message do you need to get across? How important is that message? Does it have to be delivered? Is it a very complex message? Well, then, maybe you need to use media like magazines, newspapers, print media, or if the creative issue is that you just want reminder type advertising, you just know that that's the creative solution you need is just simply reminder. All these types of media decisions that depend on what kind of creative, uh, what's the particular creative approaches that you need to use, they have different cost implications, right? So, maybe you have to decide, well, do we want to do advertising on television, or in a newspaper or a magazine or online or in a billboard? And all those things have different cost implications, but they depend upon, really the creative solution that you need. And then there's brand equity considerations, right? Do we allocate the money toward advertising and try to build brand equity, or do we allocate it towards sales promotion and try to just get immediate sales? But we know there's that trade-off. If we put too much money into sales promotion, right, we have that limited budget, then we are potentially, not treating the budget as an investment. We're just trying to get short-term sales, but not build the brand in the long term. And this is just an advertisement from the American Association of Advertising Agencies that just, tries to illustrate how important it is to use advertising, put money into advertising and not put it into sales promotion only. They say, they're showing like, rest in peace, it's like you're killing your brand by just putting too much into sales promotion, like discounts. So that's the budget process, the budget determination process. There's a bunch of different approaches, but generally speaking, realistically speaking, we tend to use a combination of all of them. So now the next thing we need to do is the agency work, right? So what we're going to do is in the next section talk about how do we brief the agency? How do we give them a creative brief for this copy platform statement? Like how do we get the agency to do the work? We've determined our strategy, we've done our homework as the marketing team, and now it's the agency's turn to give us their creative work. But how do we get that done? We use the copy platform statement or creative brief.